This is brought to you by the initiative, an agreement for the Amazon and an interstate consortium of this sustainable development of legal Amazon. We understand that the diversity of the Amazon with elements essential for all the humanity to live better. Not only the fauna and flora are important for the health and the regulation of the climate in the world, but also the people, the culture, the arts, the soil, the waters, the cities and communities. We believe that maintaining the Amazon sustainable living involves everything and everyone who are here. We need to preserve the biodiversity, to use the science and technology allied with the sustainable development, always looking at the better conditions of life for everyone who live here. We want not only to keep the forest standing, we want more standing forests, more biodiverse and sustainable, and less social and territorial inequalities. We understand that the biodiversity of the Amazon and the commercial and economic activities from this diversity is a great ally to this sustainable development that we look for. That's why I invite you to participate in the Amazon Bioeconomy Investment Innovation Forum. We want to bring new voices to this debate, get to know different experiences and perspectives about this market, and find synergies and pathways for a more prosperous and resilient Amazon. These are conversations for everyone, for those who look for investment, for those who look for options to invest, and also to those who propose public policies and everyone who wants to understand more about the Amazon bioeconomy. So shall we? Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the sixth panel of the Amazon Bioeconomy Investment Innovation Forum, with the exchange of my experience in the Brazil nuts. This panel is a promotion of the F2 IBAM and the Observatório of the Brazilian nuts that's being exhibited in the YouTube channel from the Revista Página 22 and Media Pro Castanha. My name is Lilian Assunção. I am a forest engineer, expert in value chains of social biodiversity in the Amazon, and currently I am the head of the Public Policies Department in the Executive Secretariat of Science and Technology Innovation of the State of Amazonas. I'm going to moderate this panel comprised by 3 panelists and 2 commentators. This panel has the objective to expose and debate lessons learned, findings and experiences of the Pan-Amazonian of finance experiences in the Brazil nut chain. Through the interaction and discussion among the experts in financing, credit, investment, and public policies. The intention is to present the state of the art and consider future possibilities concerning sustainability and financial development for the chain. Now I call the first panelist today to start our conversations, Victoria Mutran. Victoria is Brazilian, engineer, production engineer with a doctorate in production engineer by the Polytechnic School of USP, and she acts as a commercial director of Mutran Exporter, benefiting company of the Brazil nuts with more than 50 years of history in the sector. She's also production engineer professor in the areas of innovation and quality management in the University Center of Pará. She had her experiences in other exporters throughout the links of Brazil nuts. Thank you very much, Victoria. Welcome. You have 10 minutes so we can start our conversations. Thank you very much, Lydian, and thank you the organizers of the panel, especially the people from the OCA who has been helping us and working with us in the last months. It is a pleasure to be here with you to talk about the Brazil nut. That this is part of who I am, part of my family. We are in the 4th generation. I am in the 4th generation working with the Brazilian nuts. So I have a passion for this chain and for this product. I brought here a brief presentation with a few topics that I would like to show you, more to provoke a discussion. And we start dialoguing in the panel later. But in the context of the dialogues for the Brazil nuts, according through Mutran, we have been more than 2 years following this project. It is basically with the objective to join different links of the sector of Brazil nuts in Brazil and trying to connect with people outside of the country in Bolivia and Peru who are the other producers and understand what are the main challenges in the sector and things that we can solve, promoting these dialogues and working together. So I had done a presentation here about the dialogues, and these are some of the challenges that we have been talking in these meetings in order to find how do we increase the competitiveness and some things that we can do in order to revolutionize this product in the market. Some of the challenges that we found are sanitary problems. So issues like toxins, we heard some points of complaints of other contaminants, especially in the European markets, that became important in terms of concern. Methyl bromide and other substances that can be found in the Brazil nuts that can become an important topic of quality control and sanitary control. What certifications make sense for us to have so it is worthwhile to invest? What makes sense to have a certification of the sector, or if you can have a quality stamp or something in this sector, and how to increase the competitiveness of the Amazon Brazil nut from this perspective. We always talk about the Brazil nut, but we have to think about the Amazon nut in general, how we can reposition the product. How can I reposition this product in the international market in a way that people understand the value that the product has for the social biodiversity of our country and the world in general. And another point that has been discussed is how to improve the trade relationships. Since the extractivists, the collectors that goes to the middle of the forest and spend months there camping and collecting the nut until they reach the final consumer, the end consumer. So there are many links to this chain, each one of their own importance in the context of this chain. But we know that there are a lot of challenges to improve transparency and improve these trade relationships so everyone can win. There are some considerations that I would like to make here. The first one is that one of the things that made me curious when we talk about the nuts is that in spite of being from the Amazon and Brazil has more than 80% of the Amazon in our territory, Bolivia is the main producer and exporter of nuts in the world. So when you talk about benefiting of nuts, Bolivia is always seen as the main provider and the main producer. And this is something that since I started working with the product, since it's always aroused my curiosity. How is that possible? What are the sources of competitive advantages? How did Bolivia organize themselves to become the leader in this sector in the world? And I was talking to many different people in the sector, and I believe that one of the things that I identified as a difficulty and maybe an opportunity for improvement from the Brazilian perspective is that here in Brazil, we have important logistic challenges, especially when we compare with the Bolivian scenario, because there they have greater concentration of case of nuts trees in the same region, so the distances are shorter and the costs are shorter too. So in Brazil, we are dealing with greater distances and a better distribution of locations in terms of where the plants are and the areas of collection. And that brings a lot of logistic challenges from on how to drain this production, how to store this production in the forest so the product does not lose its quality and it maintains the same safety conditions without any contamination or microbiological problems or with any chemicals, or it loses its quality because of bad storage. So this is a challenge that we see and an opportunity, of course. We have to evaluate the Brazilian logistics to see in which points we can make more investments in terms of improving this draining and this flow and this storage. And then we have the point of investment in infrastructure. What is possible considering that we are dealing with a product in the Amazon forest? What makes sense with the, how do we locate these points? Does it make sense to have some kind of verticalization in the regions of collection? Or it's better for me to specialize in this chain of supply and to flow to the existing plants that are located in some regions in the cities? What are the new processes that we can invest if there is some kind of added value or a line of products with the nuts, and I'm going to focus on making a very good product with the nuts in order to sell as we already sell for a long time, new products that can be produced. So what makes sense in this regard? So these are provocative questions. I do not have the answers, of course, but these are the things that we can discuss from the chain point of view. If we are thinking about the sectors, one of the advantages of Bolivia is that they are well organized in the sector. So all the plants are well organized and they have an infrastructure behind it that they can be well positioned in the external market. They have associations, they have a lab, a quality lab that evaluates the quality of all the plants, and they have a good reputation in the external market. And we have to consider this in the Brazilian market if we want to grow as a sector from our country's perspective. The lab, the need for a sectorial lab has been discussed for more than 2 years that we have been talking about this, exactly based in the case of Bolivia. And lastly, the last point, I don't think I have a lot of time, but the last point is one of the things that makes my eyes pop is that I really believe in the potential of this product as one of the products that is going to carry the standing forest project. But something that bothers me is that in the external market is seen as a regular nut, as a commodity. If I am in a supermarket and a European gets in, even if it is organic or natural products, they're going to see the nuts and they're not going to know the history behind that product, and they're going to consider the price of the cashew nut and the Brazilian nuts or the Californian almond nut. I don't know. And we need to find ways to reposition this product so all the value that it brings to our social biodiversity can be valued in the end for the end consumer. In Brazil, and an organic reposition in the internal market because many nutritionists and TV programs presented the benefits of the Brazilian nuts to the health. So there was a boom after the year 2000 in the consumption of the nuts as an ingredient, and today it is a daily product in Brazil. It is not the same case in the external market, but I would like to be that way. And even in Brazil, Brazil nut is very valued by the benefits that it brings to the health, but it's not valued by the benefits for the forests. So this is another point that we need to consider. And how do we do this to make these products stronger in the external markets? Do I have more time? I don't know how am I in terms of time. Yes, you ran out of time here. Okay, so that's it. Thank you. I think in the next slide you have my contact information, so feel free to send emails. And thank you very much for the opportunity. And we can talk more in the panel.
Boa tarde a todo mundo. Vou tentar falar português porque não logrei acostumar-me à tradução, tá? O motivo da convite para mim foi falar acerca da experiência boliviana. Então vou procurar tentar dar toda a explicação referente a ele. O sistema boliviano de recolecção da castanha é praticamente um esforço privado em sua totalidade. Nos últimos anos houve um intento de involucramento do governo da Bolívia através da empresa estatal EVA, mas não como um apoio da cadeia da castanha, senão como um concorrente mais no mercado. O financiamento da safra em Bolívia é uma cadeia de transferência de dinheiro. As empresas processadoras recebem créditos do sistema bancário formal e também dinheiros de terceiras pessoas, não? Que são, nos últimos anos também se começou a trabalhar com entidades financeiras estrangeiras, mas só algumas empresas, não a totalidade da produção em Bolívia. Lamentavelmente, essas linhas de crédito são no curto prazo e com taxas de interesse muito elevadas. As processadoras traspassam este dinheiro que recebem destas fontes ao barraqueiro. O barraqueiro é o pessoal, o dono privado de um território no meio da floresta. E para o safreiro, que é a pessoa que faz a coleta mesmo no meio do mato, né? Esse dinheiro que é entregado para eles a cambio de um compromisso para que eles entreguem depois parte da sua produção, algo que não sempre ocorre se é que o preço da castanha com cáscara tende a subir depois no mercado internacional. Não, esse é um risco que sofre o processador. Outra parte da safra é financiada por pessoas particulares que atuam como intermediários maioristas da castanha com casca e eles só estão procurando o lucro, não? A especulação é lucro com seu dinheiro. Também tem uma outra fonte de financiamento que é através das ONGs, que trabalham em relação direta com as cooperativas e comunidades indígenas, a câmbio de seu produto final. Quase todos eles baixo o esquema da Fair Trade. O financiamento público praticamente não existe. salvo el que está condicionado à entrega da castanha com casca para a empresa que é do governo, que eu falava ontem, que é a EVA. Ou quando o governo de tudo deseja obter algum rédito político com alguma atividade. Pese a que no hemisfério norte nós chegamos a ouvir referente ao crédito de custo zero, incluso com interesse negativo, eles até hoje não chegaram no setor castanheiro. Pese no enorme impacto social e ambiental que tem esse produto. Temos excesso da burocracia e o demora rígido. Pessoalmente, acho que infundado se vemos que nos 3 países que comercializam a castanha do Pará, temos empresas com várias décadas no mercado. Tudo isso faz, para mim, um cenário pouco alentador que possa se trocar no curto tempo. Estes 18 anos que eu trabalho aqui na indústria da castanha, posso dizer que, pese aos discursos de todos os financiadores, eles só dão crédito aos projetos que são ser algunos aspectos como sabernos.
Es nuestro tamaño real en los impactos que tenemos y dónde se puede llegar con él y con todo eso. Generar acciones para que se pueda hacer algo a desarrollar.
You can project slide number 1, please.
Ok, aqui no slide nós podemos ver que a castanha do Pará representa menos de 1% do total das nozes que se consomem. Tem as diferentes nozes que se comercializam no mundo. E nossa castanha do Pará é só a pequenininha franja vermelha que tem aí no meio da torta, do bolo. Salvo no ano ontem, a castanha do Pará só se podia encontrar nos mercados finais nas sacolas das milhas da noz. Quase ninguém sabe sobre o impacto ecológico e social que gera o processo da colheita e a safra da castanha. Até hoje, ninguém faz algo para comunicar essa história no mundo. Pese a nosso 1% do mercado das nozes, as vendas da castanha do Pará, tanto seja da Bolívia, do Brasil ou do Peru, chega nos 5 continentes. Então, pretender que algumas das empresas dos nossos 3 países possam comunicar no mundo essa história, acho que é uma utopia, não? Apenas temos dinheiro para comprar matéria-prima cada ano. Como se poderia afrontar uma campanha mundial de média? Só temos que imaginar o valor que significaria fazer uma campanha publicitária em um só país da Europa. É possível para nenhuma das empresas que até o dia de hoje trabalham no setor no Brasil, na Bolívia e no Peru. Temos que entender que a castanha deveria transcender os limites geográficos dos 3 países, que todos os atores esqueçam seus interesses políticos e empresariais. Começando com, acho que debate absurdo referente ao mesmo nome, incluso do nosso produto, que é conhecido quase no mundo inteiro como Brasil Nut.
It's known around the world as Brazil Nut.
Até o ego nacional relacionado com qual é a produção melhor, qual é a produção local de que país é melhor. Ao final, ninguém no mundo sabe diferenciar entre 3 castanhas, qual vem da Bolívia, qual vem do Peru, qual vem do Brasil. Temos que dar uma ideia que a castanha tenha enfoque amazônico. Porém, nós, bolivianos, brasileiros e peruanos, temos que promover como produto amazônico al menos de cara no mundo. Acho que não se pode competir em um mundo tão grande e tão pequeno à vez, sendo cada vez mais pequeno. Especialmente em Brasil, nos últimos anos, nós podemos olhar que o aparecimento de muitas microempresas, microusinas, processando par de contêineres por ano. Eles só atrapalham ao final o negócio e favorecem a outro time, que a vezes é contrário a nós, que são as empresas que compram a castanha no mercado final. Acho que eu tenho uma opinião muito personal. Acho que temos que tentar fusionar os interesses, os projetos e incluso os esforços como empresa de cada uma dos países para tentar alcançar mais eficiência, aproveitar a economia das escalas, optimizar o pouco dinheiro que se obtém, de maneira de ter a melhor tecnologia disponível, adquirir o know-how desarrollado até o dia de hoje e sobretudo, para criar empresas com um estoque suficiente para poder cobrir a demanda de qualquer cliente no mundo. Só assim, nós podemos ter uma capacidade de negociação com eles.
Only then we will be able to achieve that.
Se podemos, pode dar o slide número 2, por favor.
Slide number 2, please.
Dentro desse objetivo, parte dos trabalhos que todo o setor tem que encarar, tem que ver com a reflorestação, em outros casos, aumentar a densidade dos castanhales, mais allá do impacto ecológico que isso geraria. Isso representaria a mediano prazo mais produto para vender para nós. Essa ideia que vocês olham aí no gráfico foi apresentado na Sevilha em 2018, quando se apresentou projeto trinacional entre governos, processadores nos 3 países de origem e a indústria do mercado de destino, que são membros da INC. INC é o International Nut Council, que agrupa fornecedores, distribuidores, empaquetadores e retail de todas as nueces que se comercializam no mundo. E a ideia geral era sembrar bosque, sembrar mato, não só castanhales. Tudo isso, todo este projeto é marketeável, pode ser usado com marketing e incluso se poderia autofinanciar se elabora uma estratégia coerente que possa ser atrativa para o mercado final. Mas acho que precisa de alguma instituição lo suficientemente creíble para os participantes nos 3 países, para evitar o celo entre e outro. Se me pidió falar acerca da inocuidade na Bolívia. Todo isso é esforço privado. Foi processo de mais de 20 anos que começou como raça, logo migrou para no ISO 22000 e agora nós estamos no BRC, que é estándar que quase todas as empresas manejam. O laboratório que nós utilizamos quase em totalidade dos exportadores da Bolívia se chama LOCAR. Ele foi criado primeiramente por nossa empresa e depois traspassada para o CADESNOR, que é o grêmio que agrupa todos os exportadores aqui da Bolívia. E se sustenta com aportes de todos nós, de todos os sócios, que indudablemente, como falaram anteriormente, é um referente no setor nacional e regional. No slide 3, por favor.
Your time is over.
Okay.
If you could go to the wrapping up.
Ok. O mais rápido possível é referente ao tema logístico.
As quick as possible regarding logistics here.
Referente a esse tema, eu acho que
about this topic, I think
é preciso que se cumpram os tratados que tem
we
no
need
Brasil
to cover the treaties that Brazil and Bolivia have.
Podem olhar aí no mapa que está
You
refletido
can see in the
no
map
slide.
that you can see in the
Podem ver
slide.
que até o dia de hoje toda a castanha boliviana sai por Arica,
Until
por
today,
Chile.
the red part is
Quem
where
olhando o
the
mapa
Bolivia
pode ter em
leaves
conta que não tem
the
sentido essa ruta.
Bolivia.
al hallar
So
nuestros
you can see
principales
that these
destinos que
routes
son
do not
Europa
make
y la
sense.
costa este
And
de
the main
Estados Unidos,
destinations is the west coast of US
la
and
ruta
Europe,
natural para
and
exportación
the
nuestra
natural
es por
route for
Manaus.
the export is through Manaus.
Para ello nos precisamos
And for
construir
that,
un ponche
we
sobre
need
el
to
río
create
Mamoré,
a bridge over the Amore
terminar
River
la rodovía
to finish
Manaus-Puerto Velho,
the Manaus
para que
Porto Velho roadway,
toda la producción de Bolivia, no solo
so all
castaña,
the Bolivian
possa salir
production, not only
esas.
Brazil, can traffic through this road.
Eso sería todo.
Okay, thank you very much for your explanation. Very important to understand all this dynamic in this process that takes place in this chain, and understand how Bolivia could reach this leadership position and learn from these experiences and challenges and opportunities. Thank you very much, Jose. Now I'm going to call the next panelist, that is Carina Pimenta. Carina is one of the co-founders and currently the executive director of Conexsus, and from CX Social Environment Investments. She graduated in business by the School of São Paulo and Masters in Social Development by the Success University. And she acts on related topics of impact finances, climate change and forestry conservation, social entrepreneurship, community business, and sustainable rural developments. Carina, welcome. So let's talk about financing investments in the Brazil nut chain and present a study that they just launched in the opportunities of financing for the Brazil nut chain. You have 10 minutes for your presentation. Thank you very much, Lilia. Thank you, the other panelists. Good afternoon, everyone who are listening to this panel. I think that we are exploring many different issues with all the trajectory in the industry, many points that we should debate. And I think the idea of my speech is to bring a little bit of light on how this financing has been happening in the chain, and how do we attract resources to make some of the things that were said by Jose and Victoria. And we have the whole exploration of the productive base, that is one of the areas that we had a difficulty to organize, and this impacts the structuring and the process that we want to have in terms of trading and added value and export. I'm going to share my screen now. The greatest teaser that we had for this study is to think what was happening, what the financing was happening, because the economy of the nut was happening. It is one of the most important for the extractivist base of the region. But we know that it is in the level of organization that is not so high level. So we have a few data about the chain. Even in the end consumer and throughout the chains, it's very difficult to develop advocacy policies and sectorial policies. So things like the Brazil Nut Observatório and the dialogues of the nuts and the nut associations, all these institutions are important to bring inputs for a better strategy to position the nut as a product, not only for economic generation, but for the forest and the conservation of the biomes. This narrative should be strengthened from the use of data and from the perspective to define the financing strategies. I think that Amazon is being looked at as the place where the impact investment should happen in order to move not only the Brazil nut chain, but the other chains of bioeconomy. But we don't see the stages of development and the most adequate characteristics and how to create instruments that are adequate to this reality. I think this is where we should focus. The financing, enhancement of financing, we have to think about the contextualization and the collective construction throughout the chain. Buyers, producers, processors, they have together so the financing can happen. It's very difficult to finance only a part of the chain, and the strategy needs to be broad so we have more impact in the competitiveness. So some of the points that we don't know a lot about the chain, that we made an initial survey about how the production is organized. And this survey showed, it was made in 2018, it showed that we have levels of organizations, of associations and co-ops whose main product is the Brazil nut. There are many other products, of course, but they are focused on the Brazil nut. As we can imagine, most of them are in the areas, in the forests, or in indigenous lands, or settlements, and they represent a big number of people who are involved in these chains or with the primary source of revenue in the nut. We have 127 associations, and we call community business, and these represent 15,000 extractivists. So that means that 30% of the chain is organized in some type of business. So 70% of the chain is loose through these intermediate channels, making the nut reach the processor and the consumer through channels that we do not know. It's difficult to structure. So when you think about the financing structure, we realize that you can reach a small base compared to the global size of the extractivists that we have. Looking at the financing perspective, that the existing financing perspective here in Brazil, differently from Bolivia, that we do not have public funding, we have the biggest program of rural credits in the world. We have the PRONAF, that is the national program of family agriculture, focused on family agriculture, especially in the producers. And in Brazil represents more than 33 billion reais put in this sector. Only at Amazon, there are only 2 billions, but these are significant resources. But what calls our attention is that the incentive of PRONAF are relocated from the alignment of bioeconomy, of the forest bioeconomy. When you look at out of these 2 billions, how it was allocated in terms of financing, only 55 millions, about 2% of the financing were destined to sustainable productions. So when you put a magnifying glass in the Brazil nuts, it represents 8.4 million in financing of PRONAF. So only a few contracts, only 25 extractivists all over the Amazon had contracts with PRONAF in 2019, 2020 crop. So only one cooperative that managed to be structured to access PRONAF to organize their working capital and their production. When we look at this, we see that it's basically there is no financing. So we look at the glass half full, and you can see how much we can capture in terms of significant parts. So looking at the bottlenecks and why this financing is not happening for many reasons, this has to do with the bank agents, with the knowledge about credits, with the previous knowledge of a lot of defaults that happens in the Amazon in the last years. That has significant impact. What are the strategies that can be put in place so you can increase part of this resource to replenish this part of the chain? And PRONAF is one of the most incentive. And for extractivism, the PRONAF B, we are looking at interest rates of 0.5 point a year. So when you look at this, you get in return half of what you invested. So only by looking at this, the potential that this policy has to structure this base is wonderful, but we have to allocate the budget, and so we have to organize our efforts so to make this happen. And my idea was to look at this chain in many different links. We are talking about associations and cooperatives, but there are many business models. Some of them have plants or processing units and many different products. Some of them see the Brazil nut with the shell, and some of them have the financing chain. But this is the demand that we stimulated, that we have to allocate at least 40 million a year to stimulate the crops of the Brazil nuts of the sector as a whole. In order to do that, we looked at not only what needs to be destined, but the two fundamental elements so we can have access to the use of credit. One of them is the work of technical assistance, because we have a lot of bottlenecks in the production, some sanitary issues in aflatoxin, and many opportunities and points of improvements that only with organized technical assistance that can be made with quality. Otherwise, we are going to lose the processes to the processors, because we filter a lot. So it's important when we talk about financing, not only the credits, but what allow the credits to be returned and to have a good experience. And we estimated the importance that creating a mechanisms of impact financings, of reduction of the risk of the chain, in order to guarantee and appraise the organization and the producers that are totally out of the financial market. They can integrate to the market in a system that can guarantee a mediation of the risks that we have. So we have a vast experience of being a guarantor of the bank operations that we believe, in order to generate a good relationship, and this starts to run a more virtual cycle. Okay, what is interesting from this resource, this would be an annual movement, is that practically everything can come through the rural credits of the existing resources, especially in the national budgets. So it's more like an incentive on how we organize in these hubs, in these cooperation networks, in these trade networks, in these multi-sectorial scenarios to mobilize these resources. And just to close here, although I talked a lot about public financing, I think that's the main tool for the Brazil nuts to have a better structure with the end consumer. This is not the only one. The field of impact investment can have an important role, especially in the most advanced links, to help put together this structure, investment in technology and design, and many things that can add value with more structure. And in order to have this, you need a more structured end. So we cannot organize that, otherwise you're going to spend a lot of time doing that. We have been tested in making instruments that help organizing the supply chain with their own financing. We have a fund, the Social and Environmental Fund, for many types of business, including the Brazil nuts. And this has been a wonderful learning. And what are the strategies of assisting and commercialization that you can have to put in place so this business can fulfill a development journey? So we have made this direct financing with adequate rates for the reality of the organizations. And we see that this is an important path for the impact financing, and see the organizations with their reality and test them with the financing associated with the technical assistance that allows a better knowledge with the advanced links. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Carina. This is very important for us to understand this universe of financing and investment. to have access to, and it's excellent, the studies that orient the public policies, so we can start, in fact, to work with this chain. There's some audio on. There's a feedback here. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Carina. Now I will call for Clara Daré's work. She's a specialist in knowledge management. She's creating this graphical representation. This is a visual way of organizing and giving sense to the information shared through the event. And we have been using this resource not only to record, but to understand the panels. It will be available in some of our materials and also on our website. This is very important to put this bunch of information together, and so we can take it from here and have different follow-ups so we can work later on. Thank you, Clara. Let's go to the commentators now. So I will call Plácido Costa to the floor. He's a biologist and an indigenous specialist, working with that for 30 years, with the identification process and the limitation and management of territories of indigenous lands. In the last 15 years, focused on the structuring of chains and the Brazil nut chain, and his articulator for the Pacto das Águas in Roraima. Plácido has this experience with the organizations, with a traditional community, especially in the Brazil nut chain. So he will. You have the floor, Plácido. Good afternoon. It's very delightful to be here. I have a lot of responsibility to go after these wonderful people. I have a lot to talk about. Our meeting is about innovation in bioeconomy, right? When we think about innovation, we start to look at what is ahead. We have to take several steps back and look at the back, the origin of it all. The extractivism in the Amazon, all the Pan-Amazon region, within an absence of public policies, is strengthened on relations between the extractivists and the community leaders, family relationships, and extractivists with economic agents from several levels. And until today, it is based on these relationships. And with this moment that we are living of climate changing, we have to look for more fair relations between these actors. And we're talking a lot about investment in training. We are looking at the formal channels, official channels, and we leave lessons that are learned that are not in the official channels, but which are efficient and have been operating for over 100 years. When Carina tells us that PRONAF is about stock formation, you have 0.5 interests a year, and you have a 25% bonus to be so if the extractivist borrows 1,000 reais, and if he has 200 reais bonus, this is beautiful. but of the potential of organized extractivists, only 60% have access to this. The other 40 don't. What does this mean? Us in the Amazon, we're talking about financing and credit as it is something recent, but we have credit agents and microcredit a long time ago in the Amazon. These middleman, who is this figure that we don't know well? For you guys to have an idea, to go to the point I want, in 2016, there was a estimated production of 2,000 tons of nuts, where the official financing channels operated with 1.5 million, and the informal worked with 7 million reais. And they connect big companies, big middlemen, and small middlemen very capillarily. We have to search for the lessons learned. And my concern is how the models of investment and credit can have social adhesion, can have fidelity for the peoples of the forest. Considering there is a great rate of in the officials and non-official channels, in some perspective, there's a lot of fidelity with the systems of financing and credit by these channels that we were talking about, the between quotes middleman. We have to understand better. So we have to look at the back and take the lessons learned in good elements for the extractivism and to re-signify them in favor of the peoples of the forest and the structuring of the chain of value of the Brazil nut. We have been doing some things in the Amazon. For example, the network of cantinas. They have this cantinas network. There are 27,000 cantinas now. They attend lots of families in indigenous lands, and they operate a big volume of resources. The people are chosen by the communities, and through that you move all the economy. The cantina owners are connected to the associations. It's 25 associations, if I'm not mistaken. They cannot use the resource of the credit channels that we have. You have a very interesting example as well, which is Asproc from Carawari, from the Juruá region. They have this element of the regatões, and they foster these riverside communities and have high social adhesion. To see how the financial system can look at these experiences, and when we talk about Amazon, because of the diversity, we cannot pasteurize it. We have to look at case by case, so we can think of strategies of investment, of credit, that because the financial system has to come close to the ways of production of the Amazon people and not the other way around. Otherwise, it won't work. Another very interesting system that I want to mention quickly is the Indigenous Association of the Zoró people. They are between Mato Grosso and Rondônia, and they access more than 1 million reais from PA. This is a successful case. And the management of the resources were a collegiate of 34 tribe leaders that decided for everything. They got economic return about for 80 or 120,000 reais, and they regulated the market and paid a fair price for the collectors. I want to bring this point of view actually of the forest, of the support organizations, for us to think about the financing strategies of investment and credit, and inviting the financial sector to understand better the Amazon floor. These are my comments, and I think there's a big field for us to think. Jose told about the 1% of the participation in the world of the nuts in general. We have a positioning that's very interesting related to Mercosur and positioning of the United States. I think it's possible for us to do a Pan-Amazonic strategy to aggregate value, not only looking at the forest, but the people as well. So I have three questions. I would ask Carina, her study is very nice. How can we, through some lessons learned in the Amazon, how can we make dialogues with the financial sector? How can we make it closer? How can we comprise, for example, the people from the continuous network, from the Pronaf-B system? The second question is for Victoria. When community enterprises or collective enterprises of people who collect the nuts, they access credit. Most extractivists are indigenous or traditional people. They live in indigenous and reserves, indigenous lands and reserves. The financial system asks for guarantees and they don't have any. For example, the Bolivian case, the financing is made by the entrepreneurial sector. Up to what point the Brazilian sector can offer partnerships with this collective of producers and offer guarantees based on commercial partnerships? And third question is for my friend Jose. Okay, there are two questions, okay? How do you see we could take the next steps for a Pan-Amazonic solution, and how can we look for reaching 2% of the world market? And the second most important question is how can we build the relationships between the Bolivian companies and the collectives of the people who collect the nuts? So with this, I end my participation here and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Plácido. I think we can start with Carina. Very good, Plácido. We have to go through the journey. I like the word journey because it represents the scenario that we have to aim to. If we walk without a destiny, we reach nowhere. How can we build a place where you can have these favorable policies, and then we have to demystify some things. The issue of the guarantees that you guys are mentioning, no bank or financial agents ask for these types of guarantees for crops because they don't know the chain, they don't know the actors and the people. They won't go in there, the indigenous land, and to get to know this. So you have to have partners and to feel the chain. So you can have this intermediation, this translation, because contextualization, and talking about the bottlenecks that are some myths of rural credit, that the producers will never be able to access credit. They can, but we have to create support strategies. They won't be able to do this alone. And we have to have a learning mechanism. I like this experience that are diversified and the experiences you make, because this generates financial education and it allows us to learn and to understand what's the logic of credit. So the learning mechanisms are fundamental. The risk philanthropy has a huge role in leveraging these mechanisms. If we are turning into a chain, it goes to the limit because philanthropy goes to the limit. So they have to be a step on a ladder. As the example of the continents, it has a profitable end. But what are we doing now? In the partnership with the people from the Amazon, we understand, we study the credit agents so we can have this reach the cooperatives to the correct level.
So in the middle ground, we identified the locals that are from the communities that know the people, and they will know about the financing, and among them, they are going to make these decisions about how to use and how to manage those resources. Another point is it is allowed that the credits can be managed collectively. So it is possible to harvest the rural credits to have this rotation. And for that, you need to create the knowledge and I think it's wonderful the degree of the Keynesians because it is a leap. You generated agreements among all the producers, and now you can introduce some scale elements. This is what I would say, and yeah, we don't have a lot of time, but for the financial Plácido, it's not only the financial system that we have to come closer. We have to come closer to the support financing mechanisms. You have a huge gap to unlock this credit more than the financial agency itself. Thank you, Carina. Now, Victoria, we don't have a lot of time actually, but so please be brief in your comments now. I'll try to answer very quickly. I agree 100% with everything that Carina said in her presentation. I think it was wonderful. And I'm going to give my opinion because I didn't make myself so clear in my speech. I believe that my feel on the sector is that the formalization of the base, if we organize ourselves in organizations and to formalize the extraction of the Brazil nuts, this is one of the main pathways to solve many of the problems and the challenges that we have today. And one of them is the access to credit. So I don't know a lot how these credit lines work. I'm hearing of what Carina is saying about the study of Conexsus, but I do not know deep down how these credit lines work. But from the industry perspective, our main objective in the supply chain is to have providers that we can trust and have long-term partnerships. If this is a guarantee in these crop contracts is a guarantee for the credit to the supplier, brilliant. So we are open to this. I don't know what would be necessary specifically from the industry perspective who is buying the product in order to give some guarantee to or better access to the community credits and the associations. But it's totally interesting to the industry. I think I can speak for everyone because I think that everyone is looking for providers that we can trust and they are willing to be with us along the crops with volume and quality, and they are going to deliver basically. So if they are paying correctly, I don't know if we have a word for this, but I don't know if I answered your questions, but this is what I thought. Jose? Okay, Jose. Well, referring to the second questions that Plácido asks, the relationship of the money, it also happens in the Bolivian nut. As I said before, here in Bolivia, we also have the same problems of support to have access to credit, because the collector and the peasants, they do not have the ownership of the land sometimes. So the banking system, the traditional banking system, do not provide a direct credit for this reason. And as we said before, this is a policy of the local government, the local credit. So all this process is in charge of the private sector. The private sector is the ones that take the risk to finance the other actors of the chain and take over the process to give license of the credit and to loan the money. About the first question that he asked, how to make a Pan-Amazonian strategy, I think that the first step is we need to have a political decision from the governments, from the administrations. I think this is the first step, no doubt. And the second step is that we need to have a company and a business decision in the case of competition of processors and benefiter of the Brazil nut. So we need to have to provide the product and not the personal brand of each one of the products in different events and in different opportunities, trying to tell the story of the Brazil nut. This is a multiplying effect of the economies in different regions of the world, more in some regions and less in other regions, but I'm talking about social impact and environmental impact. And the health factor that is also important now. And everybody together can provide Brazil nut as a superfood and not as an appetizer. So this is something that we need to have a strategy to do something. And then we need the decisions to make everything together so we don't separate the strategies. Okay, thank you, Jose. We went over the time here with Plácido, and thank you very much. It was wonderful questions. And the panelists answered some questions that came from the chat. We have many questions from the chat, but we still have the commentator, André Machado, to collaborate and cooperate with our conversations. So I'm going to call André now. André is an administrator with focus in agribusiness by the Viçosa University and business for the Federal University of Goiás. And he worked for the Observatório of the Brazil nut. André, the floor is yours. We have 14 minutes. We still have questions from the chat room, so let's try to answer at least 2 of them, if we can. Okay. Thank you, Lydian. Good afternoon, everyone. Especially Carina, Lydian, Victoria, and Jose and Plácido. I am here very excited. I have a list of questions. I'll try to hold myself here. First, I want to thank for the invitation on behalf of the Observatory of the Brazil nuts. So as one of the representatives of the OCA, there are other colleagues that are part of the observatory as well. And I want to congratulate SEDECT, the secretary, and everyone and the partners for the event. This is a wonderful and very important event. I think it was good to hear the overview that Victoria gave, although they had only little time to speak, and Jose also talked about believing in this Pan-Amazonian strategy. I think this deep down that Carina brought with the connection study, and Plácido already talked about this important link, the most important link of the nut chain from the primary production that has a difficult challenge, this finance. I would like to go back to this panoramic view with my role of general experts. If we look at the Brazil nut chain, as many other social biodiversity chain, there are a lot of challenges. We lose ourselves on them. We mentioned some of them here, but as an OCO observatory of the Brazilian nuts, we try to think about these challenges and to organize an agenda with the academic partners. And I think this path has shown us that there are some important axes to work on. I would like to mention some of them that can guide this conversation about opportunities of investments. At first, every chain needs to be well known in order to act. I think the act of information and statistics is very important. So when you start to see the risk of continuity in the census in Brazil, this is something that scares us because we need information like this. So in order to capture the economic importance of a chain, of the Brazil nut chain that is very informal, we need to invest more in statistics, in more information, more studies, as the one that was mentioned by Carina. And the OCA has been doing this with the generation of information about prices. This is one of the most important information that needs to be put in place. Of course, there is a governance that makes sense to discuss a national policy for the Brazil nut according to its importance. Spaces where the government can receive the demands, because we don't have that today. Today, I would highlight some of the participants talked about the importance of these spaces in the Brazilian Association of Nuts, the initiatives as the dialogues and the observatories and events like this. So we need to have more structured spaces to dialogue. And the financing, commercial promotion, as it was said here, they do not see us as differentiated nuts with all the history that has behind it. The research and development and innovation, as we discussed the agrobusiness 4.0, we should discuss the extractivism 4.0. The conditions of work, of collections of those who are in the forests are the same for hundreds of years. So maybe we can go back to our small efforts that could be better of research and development and innovation for the working conditions of these people. And as the chain, the whole chain as logistics, innocuity, and everything that depends on this research and innovation and development. And the many challenges is the sanitary. Among the many challenges, Jose talked about the sanitaries. The toxins is our problem, and Bolivia could manage to overcome it, and Brazil somehow went back to the domestic market, but these concerns remain. So we have a lot of challenges, and these challenges, looking at the glass half full, are actually good opportunities of investments, good opportunities to perform, and even in the public investments perspective, that do not have this profit view, but other types of objectives that the well-being of the people and the economic growth, reduction of poverty. I think the bottlenecks of the Brazil nut chain is a good opportunity for investment, because this is a product that has the adherence with all the trends of consumption that are for foods and cosmetics. It is sustainable, it is vegan. So there is a story to tell. So the Brazil nut has the potential to increase the growth as Jose showed here. So we see only 1% of the total nut market. So inside this distant focus from the chain and trying to understand what would be the smart combination among public and private efforts of investments, I would like to explore my questions here. And if we have time and everyone answers, we can leave it for reflection, because we have the possibilities of public investments, we have the possibility of private investments, and some of the participants, Carina talked about that. My questions are where each one fits, especially in the fiscal crisis. We know that public investment is essential, but it's very difficult to talk about this. So to Jose, I would like to ask, basically, you said, Jose, that the investments and the financing in Bolivia are basically private. But my questions to you is, when there was the problems of the toxins in the beginning of the 2000s, that all the producing countries had to organize themselves, there wasn't any public investments, especially in the bilateral investments, bilateral agreements with the private sector. But in this context of low public investments, what was the role of the international roles? I participated in some events of the UNOVAX project for the European Union that acted in Bolivia and in Peru. This international project somehow helped the Bolivian chain to project themselves. And the third question is, you always mentioned the cooperation, the pre-competitive strategies. What is the secret? What would we do to finance a pre-competitive alternatives? Do you see Brazilian companies and the Bolivian companies acting on this, or do you see another source of income from maybe three-border international agreements, as the case of UNOVAX? And to Carina, I wanted to ask, I think she talked about the impact investments in the private sector would fit better in these opportunities for beyond the primary production. We have a lot of opportunities. Besides the commercial promotion, this is what I understand. Do you have any idea on where it would fit, according to all this information, logistics, quality, lack of labs, where would this fit? And only a last question. It's very interesting to show that there are 2 billion available from PRONAF and the demand is relatively small from the nuts or beyond the primary production. So don't you think we should estimate what is the demand of investments in the nut chain and what we have in terms of supply, so we can understand how we can solve these questions? And to Victoria.
And to Victoria, I'd like to ask, thinking of the chain as a whole and considering the needs for investment in this new concept of bioeconomy, technical systems, logistics, storage, labs, even to organize these multi-stakeholder strategies, we need investment for that. For you as a entrepreneur, what is the best combination of public and private investment? What should each of these sectors join at? What's the best combination? And for last, I promise, also for Victoria, how could Brazil mirror themselves in Bolivia? We have a very young association of nut producers. Why can't we do this shared strategies lab, a space of cooperation as they did in Bolivia? What happens in Brazil that we can't go forward on that? So I'll use this pack of questions that André put, and I'll add a question from the chat. And I will ask you to also say your goodbyes and in the end of your speeches. So the question from the chat, I understand, is for everybody. The question is, how do you assess that the current model of associations is adequate to the production? If you all could mention something about that as well. And each of you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you. I think we could start with Jose. And then Carina and Victoria. The question about aflatoxins, all the actions from the defense and representation has been done in a private level. And it defended and was able to, that the nuts, not only the nuts from Bolivia, is not penalized over the limit. There's a level that is allowed in Europe. It's between 2 and 4 parts per million. Then they raise the limits for 5 and 10, what is current. This has all been a private effort. The international help that was successful to some level here in Bolivia, the program of the United Nations and the European Cooperation, it gave incentives to the beginning of this process. This is a project that instructed the first steps for the companies to be certified. And the last question, what could be done to establish a strategy that is general? No doubt is about financing. It's very difficult for especially the big companies that they only have money to buy the nuts with the peels. So we can't have a situation that could be feasible. And together with the companies that could have profit from this strategy, these are the companies that work and sell what they have. Because financing has to have an answer in the market. The final client pays for a product that will have an added value. And this added value should be about social and nutritional parts. And this is what the final client ends up paying more. And the retail partner who will transfer paying some more for the processor here in the origin, and they will transmit this price throughout the chain. We need indispensably to have other members of the chain, not only in the local level. Carina, and then Victoria. Being quick, I think there's a huge potential for investment in things that we don't really see. We see the product, and there is product development, product enhancement. This is important to be explored, but there's also a part regarding monitoring and tracking system, more adequate devices, technology that could be at the service of solving very real problems in the communities, but also in the rest of the chain as well. We need to take it from the academic centers. Brazil produces a lot of research about opportunity. They see these problems in the research. We could invest more, but we have a difficulty to looking at the research with the practical application to the market in business development and developing strategies. And this could be done in several ways in a pre-competitive environment. Companies, producers getting together and saying, let's invest in this together. And not only with resources, but with know-how, and you go in the equation with other important things to generate understanding. And in the Amazon now, we have several challenges arising that will look at the economies of the forest with entrepreneurship, with little businesses, little organizations. We have a lot to develop. These places where we can see the solutions for the chain, and we can have the situation to leverage an incubation that allow knowledge learning and patient investment, several modalities. We don't have to be stuck with one technique. there's a trajectory for the business development that we have to put the nut in the primary role. I'll stop here, okay? Victoria? I'll invert the order a bit. I'll answer the second question first and then the first question. I don't know the reason why Brazil is not able to get together as Bolivia does. Maybe it's because in Bolivia the industries are much more concentrated. I haven't been there, but I've heard that there are around maybe 20 plants around the city of Riberalta. The people are at the same place, they are together, and this brings some positive points. In Brazil, we are scattered through several states and cities, and it gets a little more complicated for us to be together, creating solutions at the same time. There's also another aspect that the plant sector in Brazil had a huge change recently. There were just a few players that they had some kind of relationship, but it's growing exponentially, the number of companies that today process the nuts. Just changed the scenario a bit. And I think the difference will be in having dialogue. These initiatives that arose in the last 2 years will be good to make the market closer. And I believe that in 1 or 2 years, we'll see Brazil having a much stronger sector. I don't know up to which point the public sector can invest directly in the chain. I don't know credit lines. I don't know at what level they can invest, but I see this access to projects and incentives for innovation projects. Maybe some kind of incentives. The base products as OCA, that will help the chain and to promote this conversation in the sector. And from the private point of view, when we look at the base sector, the part of technical support and try to help the producers to develop quality and to improve the practices and the certification part as well. And I think we will be able to get together and to do this marketing and repositioning abroad. Maybe it's a way to add value to everyone that will bring from the base to the final client this extra value to the nut. I would like to thank for the opportunity, for the invitation, and I'm at your disposal for us to talk more and to get this subject forward in other opportunities. Thank you. Thank you, Victoria, André, Jose, Carina, Plácido. It has been a great dialogue. We need to debate and to talk more about this with SECT and SEDECT, together with the Nova Social B project. We are developing together with partners in OCA. This debate is very necessary. We talked about investments and credit and financing, especially for the base organizations. We know the potential of this chain today, and we need to really invest efforts for it to be leveraged. I thank you for the opportunity to be here with you and for you to accept this invitation. And I would like to add just a little notice. On the 22nd of June, we'll have this experience exchange panel. It will be excellent with several experts of this chain. that also needs to be looked at. And I think that's it, guys. Thank you. See you later.